Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down Genesis chapter 3 verse 16, which reads, "Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." So there is a physical way to see this verse, and there is a spiritual way to interpret it too. And in this video, we're going to look at both sides. So talking physically, the verse is pretty clear. What I want to point out though is that children, of course, are a blessing. If you read Psalm 127 verse 3. Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. See also Genesis chapter 33 verse 5. The only thing is that the process through which man would obtain that blessing now became a painful process. But of course, women, although they know it's painful, they still go ahead with it nonetheless because they want that end result. And Christ actually talked about this in John chapter 16 verse 21, where he said, "A woman when she's in travail hath sorrow, because her hour is come. But as soon as she is delivered of the child, she remembereth no more the anguish for joy that a man is born into the world." And in addition, the last phrase where it says, "And thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee," simply means that the family structure now revolved around the simple idea that the man is sort of the head of the family, there's his wife, and then he has children. That's the biblical way of seeing the family structure. If you read 1 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 3. "But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God." So that's the physical side. Now, the spiritual side has to do with God Almighty being the husband in this case. If you read Isaiah chapter 54 verse 5, you can see he was considered a husband, and man as a whole can be considered the wife, based on the fact that if you look at the relationship God had with his people Israel, he was the husband and his people were like his spouse or wife. The purpose that God Almighty has for man as a whole was something that he wanted to use to bless man. He wanted man to be perfect. He wanted to build a good relationship with man, right from when he created us in the Garden of Eden. The only thing is, when we sinned, the relationship that we had with God was, in a sense, damaged, I'd say. If you read Isaiah chapter 59 verses 1 and 2, you'll see that Isaiah the prophet said that we were separated from God. And that was why the psalmist said, "Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me," in Psalm 51 verse 5. And Paul added, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God," in Romans chapter 3 verse 23. So the process through which God Almighty would be worshipped by perfect creatures now became a painful process. And what do I mean by that? Well, a big part of God's plan to restore man to perfection was the ransom sacrifice, that is Christ's sacrificial death. And that was painful both to Jesus Christ and to God Almighty, because if you read Luke chapter 22 verse 44, you'll see that Christ was in agony. He was in distress. And his Father in heaven would have felt some of that, because his Son, who had not done anything wrong, obviously, was on earth suffering for man's sins. And the people who he was suffering under were wicked people, the Pharisees, or the Jews, broadly speaking. If you read Hebrews chapter 12, verses 2 and 3. So God had to watch that happen. And although it was painful, he made that sacrifice because he wanted the end result, which is Christ's sacrificial death, being able to atone for the original sin that was committed in the Garden of Eden. If you read texts like Matthew chapter 20 verse 28. And in Isaiah chapter 53 verses 10 and 11, Isaiah the prophet spoke about this travail that had to happen for that good result to come. "Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him, he hath put him to grief. When thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see of the travail of his soul, and shall be satisfied. By his knowledge shall my righteous servant justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities." So that is a big part of the process. And if you read Matthew chapter 24, verses 7 and 8, when the disciples had asked Jesus about what signs would indicate that he has returned, he didn't say, "Oh, when I return, there's going to be peace. There's going to be glory. There's going to be all kinds of fantastic stuff happening. Man is going to live in peace and so on. Rather, he said there would be trouble. He said nation would rise against nation. He said kingdom would rise against kingdom and more things. And at the end, he said, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Or as the Revised Standard Version renders it, all these are but the beginning of the birth pangs. So it ties that connection between this and some other texts that talk about the purpose of God that is brought to life. And if you read Revelation chapter 12, really from verse 1 straight down to the end, you see the woman, which is God's organization, having a child, which is God's purpose, being born and being fulfilled. But I won't get into that now because that is actually worth a whole other video. But the general idea is that the process through which God would refine man, as Zechariah the prophet said in Zechariah chapter 13, verses 8 and 9, became a painful process due to man's sin. But God Almighty is interested in going through it nonetheless because he wants that end result. If you read Isaiah chapter 65, verse 18, he said, but be ye glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing and her people a joy. And I will conclude with the fact that when Genesis chapter 3 verse 16 says, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee, what that means spiritually is that God's will and purpose would prevail because the earth, the universe, and its space belongs to him. As he said through Isaiah the prophet, I have made the earth and created man upon it. I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their host have I commanded. If you read Isaiah chapter 45, verse 12. And that is where I'm going to stop. I'm breaking down Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, which reads, unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. If you have enjoyed this video, then you can click the like button and also consider subscribing if you want to join this community of people who, like you and myself, are interested in learning the meaning of biblical texts. And if you have any questions about what I said in this video, then you can put them in the comment section below and we will address them. Have a good day and God bless you.